Shalom Chaverim, today Parashat Korach, and we're going to do it together with the German philosopher Jurgen Habermas. All right, let's jump right in to a quote. The public sphere, which once confronted the state with the principle of rational critical debate, has lost its critical function. It has become a sphere of public relations in which large organizations, state and private, seek to manipulate public opinion rather than engage with it. Now, this sounds extremely relevant and extremely up-to-date, but in fact it was written in 1962 by Habermas in a work that is called The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere. Habermas, and before I'm going to get into his biography, here at Der Nister we have a different work by him, the philosophical discourse of modernity, if you wish to borrow it. So a few words about Habermas. Habermas, some of you may know, was kind of like the latest or the later member to join the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School that was predominantly Jewish neo-Marxists, critical theorists that include Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer and Herbert Marcuse and Walter Benjamin. Much later on, Habermas joined that group, or actually studied under Horkheimer and Adorno. And he was actually the only non-Jewish member of the group. Not only he was non-Jewish member, he was born in Düsseldorf and was raised by a father who was a member of the Nazi Party. He himself, like all German boys of that time, which was mandatory, was a part of the Hitler Youth. But after the war and really paying close attention to the Nuremberg trials, he was horrified by what he learned by the horrors of the Holocaust, and he really dedicated his life to try and engage in research and philosophy on how we can strengthen democracy. And so it's not surprising that after the war, when Adorno and Horkheimer went back to Frankfurt, he went to study under them. And this is why he is considered a member. Another interesting fact about Habermas is that he was born with a cleft palate, and he had 2 corrective surgeries throughout his life, and so that caused a heavy speech impairment, which may shifted his focus on trying to heal democracy through communication, and his focus was on communication, and it's also very interesting about his biography. Now, the main work of Habermas is to basically try and create a public sphere. And what it is, it's an arena, okay, in which people could engage in rational, inclusive, and open debate. Okay, now this concept is actually not foreign to us. The core concept in Judaism, which is known as machloket l'shem shamayim. What is machloket l'shem shamayim? It really translates to a dispute or a debate for the sake of heaven. Now, this also comes from our Torah portion today, Korach. So what happens in Korach? In Korach, it basically describes the man named Korach, who was a Levite, and basically challenged Moses and Aaron's authority. He took 250 leaders and said, look, we don't understand why you elevate yourself above everyone else. My claim is that we are all holy and we can all rule. And so Moses proposed a test in which they will all offer incense and see which group prevails. Long story short, Korach and his people, the ground opens and they are swallowed alive, and the rest of the incense offerers are being consumed by fire. So that's kind of like the end of that tale. But what's interesting about this is actually what the Mishnah has to say in reference to Korach. So, in the Mishnah, in Masechet Avot, it's written, כל מחלוקת שהיא לשם שמיים, סופה להתקיים, ושאינה לשם שמיים, אין סופה להתקיים. איזוהי מחלוקת שהיא לשם שמיים? זו מחלוקת הלל ושמאי, ושאינה לשם שמיים זו מחלוקת קורח וכל עדתו. All right, so I will translate and explain. So, it says, every dispute that is for the sake of heaven will in the end endure. But one that is not for the sake of heaven will not endure. Which is the controversy that is for the sake of heaven? Such was a controversy of Hillel and Shammai. Okay, so really quick, Hillel and Shammai were two houses that for basically every issue, every dispute, they were in almost opposite opinions. So whenever there was a case, they always offered two very, very different opinions. However, we also know that the houses of Hillel and Shammai were very close together, meaning the houses married one another. And so there wasn't an inherent animosity between them. And their dispute was always fruitful and one which took us forward as a nation to try and understand many different cases. And so whatever disputes always occurred between them is considered for the sake of heaven, L'Shem Shammai. But then the Mishnah said, but what is a machloket, a dispute that is not L'Shem Shamayim, that is not good, that is not positive? It's like the one for Korach. Because there it came from a place of hate. It didn't come from a place of closeness, of love, of trying to figure something out. But it came from a place of ego, from a place of, why are you elevated than more elevated than us, right? So, the big question here that many of our commentators tried to figure out, how do we know that a machloket is l'shem shamayim? How do we know that a dispute is positive and fruitful and for the sake of heaven and not the opposite and not destructive? And there are many answers to that. One answer I want to share with you comes from Rabbi Yehonatan Eiveshutz, who is basically an 18th century, mostly rabbi, who offers an answer in his book Yarot Dvash. Here I wanted to show you there's this very, it's a different book by Eiveshutz called Keshet Yonatan. It's a very, very old book. Actually, this copy is from 1913. So if you want to come and look at it from Keshet Yonatan. So what does Eiveshutz say about how do we know that a dispute is positive? So he says, בזאת ודאי המחולקים ובעלי ריבות הם זולת הדבר שנחלקו בו ומנוגדים זה לזה, הם אוהבים גמורים בלב ובנפש, זהו עוד שמחלוקתם לשם שמיים. אבל אם הם אויבים ונותרים שנאה זה לזה על ידי מחלוקת, זהו שלא לשם שמיים והתייצב השטן בתוכם. So what he's saying here, he's saying that he basically gives us a golden rule. Golden rule, how do you know that a dispute is positive? And he says that if the people who are debating love each other. He says, Ohavim Gmurim, love each other inherently. And when the dispute is the opposite, is destructive, is when the people are enemies. Now, this sounds pretty obvious, right? I mean, okay, if friends debate or if enemies debate, it's two very different things. But actually, it's a lot more profound than that. And to understand it, let's get back to Habermas and his idea of the public sphere. So Habermas is saying something incredibly similar to Eiveshutz. And so what he says, he first brings the example of the Central European salons of the 17th and 18th centuries. And I quote, he says, in the salon, the club, the coffee house, or wherever else the public gathered, there was in principle no distinction between nobleman and commoner. The only hierarchy was that of reason itself. So he basically says that the last time when there was this actual open and inclusive debate happened in those salons. It's a very controversial thing to say, by the way, because of the way society was back then. But he portrays what would be an ideal arena of dispute. And he has few principles for that. So first of all, inclusivity. Okay, so it should be accessible and open, right, to everyone, to all citizens, regardless of their status, right? It should be based on rational, critical debate, which is very, very important, right? So the discussions have to be based on reason, on evidence, right, and argumentation, and not coercion or manipulation. All right. Then equality. Of course, all the participants, once they are inside the debate and engage with the debate, they have to be treated as equal. then the focus on the common good. Okay, so the deliberation aim for general societal interest and not private or factional agendas. This kind of reminds the idea of Rousseau and the general will, right? That the debate has to eventually favor the common good and not private interests. And then finally, the autonomy. All right, so the public sphere is independent of state control and of economic pressures. So, what Habermas is telling us is that when our debate stems from our particularity, basically from our identities and status and agendas, right? It is actually differentiating between us, making us enemies. Like Avishit said, it's not a debate l'shem shamayim. It's not a machloket for the sake of heaven, right? And so we have to remove these obstacles. And it almost also reminds us of John Rawls and his veil of ignorance, how we have to remove everything that differentiates between us in order to find the common ground. And so this definitely begs the question, so didn't the digital arena that we have today solve all these problems, right? Is the digital arena, the internet, is basically, Habermas's ideal of public sphere? Well, the answer is obviously complicated. The digital arena definitely and most certainly solved the access issue. It also brought with it numerous new problems and which other forces which manipulate us and influence us, such as the misinformation or logarithmic bias or polarization and etc. etc. So this brings me back here to Der Nister, and I asked myself, maybe this is Habermas's salon. Maybe this is what he meant by people who step into a room, and a room that is accessible to all and really can put everything behind without the manipulation of forces, including of the digital arena, and really practice rational discourse. And the goal of all of this is that Habermas said that this ideal public sphere is the one thing that can keep democracy healthy. So today I would like to encourage all of us to, if not come here, then form our own Der Nisters, our own salons, where we can do just that. Shabbat Shalom.